You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your weekly podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. My name is Eric Walterkins.
I'm Gavin Schmidt.
And our topic for today is how to join the Mafia.
Yeah, how to join it.
So take it away, Gavin.
All right. So how do you join the Mafia? There's a few things you got to do. First of all, you have to be Italian.
At no time in history has there ever been a point where they've allowed that to not be.
No. Unless somebody was pulling a fast one on them. Nope. That's originally the rule was you had to be a full-blooded Sicilian. Then they loosened that up. You could be Italian of any kind. Then they loosened it up again, and as long as your last name was Italian. So you could have like an Italian father and an Irish or whatever mother, and that was fine. And I'm pretty sure that's where the rule. So you have to be Italian. You have to be a man. There's no women who are allowed to be. So we're both men, but I don't think either of us are Italian. So
yeah, we're out.
Yeah, we're out.
Unfortunately. I don't need to be in the Mafia, to be honest with you.
No.
I'm good.
So there's that. You do not apply to get in the Mafia. You don't fill out a form and hand it in and say you'd like to join up with them. It's not.
I'm going to guess this is something that it's, a guy who knows a guy or something along that lines.
Yeah, pretty much a guy who knows a guy. I think it's sort of comparable to baseball, and maybe this is a bad analogy, but
I'm really just want to say that I'm really curious how these analogies are going to play together.
Yeah. Okay. So you're familiar with in baseball, you've got the major league.
Yes.
And then you've got like your minor leagues and you've got your farm leagues and you've got whatever, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think it's comparable to that. Like in this case, the major leagues would be
okay.
But then you got these other guys who are out there, they're committing robberies, burglaries, they're involved in bookmaking, they're gambling, whatever. And but they're not in the Mafia yet. They're involved in these smaller scale up. And I think this is kind of what happens. One of the guys in the major leagues notices you. Hey, you're doing a good job. You're making a lot of money. We want to recruit you into our organization.
And that seems very feasible. That's, acquisition. That's a business acquisition right there.
Yeah.
So, and I wouldn't be surprised if at a period of time in, say, Milwaukee, there were people that were just creating these crime organizations to hopefully catch the eye of the Mafia to get picked up by them.
Yeah, definitely. I know that there were some burglary gangs who became sort of well-known, which is not probably a good thing if you're well-known, but in this case it would be. And yeah, and some of them would then get recruited in, some of them didn't. And this is really, really well-known in Chicago. Like in Chicago, there was a gang called the 42 Gang, which is a terrible name for a gang. But the reason they called themselves that is there's an old story called Alibaba and the 40 Thieves.
Okay.
So Alibaba plus the 40 Thieves is 41. They're like, we're better than that. we're the 42 Gang. So there are these kids in Chicago who they were like, we're better than the 40 Thieves.
Oh, these crime lords are brilliant.
I know, but you'll find that a lot of the Chicago members ended up coming out of this gang. Like it was a really common practice that these were people who grew up together and they one by one started getting inducted in. And we see that also in Milwaukee. There was a guy named Kono Labrizi, Kono the Weasel, and he had a little gang of like teenage thieves who were going around committing burglary and stuff, and some of his burglary kids making it in because they got known, which is, again, probably not great that you're known as a burglar, but that will get you noticed.
Would any of these little divisions, the 42 gangs or whatever, that are not really the Mafia, but that's where kind of the Mafia recruits from?
Yeah.
So you used the baseball parody, which actually worked pretty well, and I'm shocked by that.
Thanks.
But so I'm going to go back to the baseball parody, and the baseball teams have their own minor league teams.
Yeah.
So at any point in time, did like the Milwaukee Mafia have a specific gang that was almost not part of the Mafia, but closely associated with the Mafia, that they were specifically like, if I was in the Mafia and I met a kid and the kid's like, I want to be in the Mafia, I'd say, go join this gang and that's your road to getting into the Mafia. Do you think it ever became that structured, or were they just looking around the other known crime gangs in the area and targeting
I suppose that's possible. I mean, I couldn't tell you about any internal discussions they had about that, but I mean, I suppose it makes sense that they said, hey, go work for this guy and we'll see how you do. That could certainly happen. Yeah.
But from your research, there isn't a specific gang in Milwaukee that it was like, my God, half the mafia came from this gang or anything like that.
Not so much, but see, the thing with Milwaukee is now, if you remember back to an earlier episode, we talked about how a lot of these guys came from the same city in Sicily.
So a lot of them already knew each other.
So they already know each other.
Yeah.
They grow up in the same neighborhood. A lot of them are cousins with each other. And more often than not, when somebody joins, they already have a brother or their father-in-law or somebody already has known them. So it's very rarely somebody who's just randomly lives in the same city. It's especially in Milwaukee. In bigger cities, it's different. But in Milwaukee, being the smaller community that it is, you usually know a kid. And by the time that they become old enough that you want to recruit them, you've seen who they are. You know if they can be trusted.
So when you're saying that, like, so I'm in the mafia and my nephew moves here,
Mm-hmm.
does that kid, once he becomes of age, I can just recruit him into the mafia? Or am I going to send him through the minor leagues before he gets to the big leagues?
It's a great question. So to get in, so you got to be Italian, you got to be male, you got to be a man. Now, there is a common myth that to get into the mafia, you had to have killed somebody. And that I don't think was ever true. It maybe was true at one point in time, or maybe certain cities that was true in. It doesn't seem to be true in Milwaukee, at least not later on. And it doesn't really make sense if you think about it either. Because if everybody had to kill somebody, you'd have to come up with a reason to start killing people. Like, doesn't make a lot of sense. Really, the primary thing is, can you? So yeah, so you got to make money. Sometimes people were involved in murders, and maybe they drove a getaway car or something. But
and that doesn't make very much sense to me, because when it all comes down to it, I understand that the mafia did a lot of illegal things and basically worked in the dark area of the commerce.
Yeah,
but in the end, they were just a business. That's what they were about. They were not about killing people. They were about making money.
Correct.
Maybe sometimes they killed somebody to, help that cause.
Yeah, sometimes you got to do that. But generally, no. I mean, the main thing, if you can make money without killing somebody, you're going to make money without killing somebody, because police really don't when you kill people. Like, if you're going to gamble, they can look the other way. If you're going to be involved in prostitution, they can look the other way. When there's a body laying in the street, they can't really ignore that. Yeah. So say you got this nephew. Now, you can be his sponsor. Everybody has to have a sponsor. But nobody gets in unless the boss okays it. So the boss has the final say of who's getting in and not.
So the sponsor would be the person basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you say, hey, you're already in, and you say, hey, my nephew, he's going to be great. He's the perfect guy for this. And you talk to the boss. You say, hey, can we get him in? The boss is either going to thumbs up or thumbs down. If they thumbs up it, you're the sponsor. If he does anything that screws up, that's going to come back on you. So make sure you're picking the right people, because if he ends up later on where he's going out and he's ratting out his friends to the police, first they're going to go after him, but then they're going to go after you, and they're going to say, the hell did you let this guy in? So yeah, so you got to have a sponsor. If you get approved, you go to the ceremony.
The ceremony.
Yes.
I imagine this is like boot camp ceremony or something.
Well, it's not that bad. So the ceremony to actually go from being sponsored to being a full member, they have it on record back to 1877. It's probably earlier, but that's the earliest time they have it on record. Somebody actually ratted them out and said, hey, this is what we did to get in. That guy got killed, so don't be like that guy. But what he told the police about how people were made members, still 100 years later, they were doing it the same way, because they've caught a few of them on hidden microphones, and they've had people who have turned informers who would be like, yeah, we still do it that way. So I'm going to tell you what happened.
Okay.
In this secret ceremony.
All right. So
you go into a basement or an abandoned warehouse or somewhere where they're not going to walk in on. And it's you, the new member, your sponsor, the boss, and a handful of other guys. Not necessarily everybody, but a handful of other guys, just sort of witness. And you're going to get seated down at a table. They are going to take a knife and they're going to poke your finger, your trigger finger. And they're going to take a drop of blood from your trigger finger and they're going to wipe it on the picture of a saint. Because these guys are all Catholic.
Okay.
On that saint, then they light the picture of the saint on fire. And you have to hold it in your hands until there's nothing left but ashes. And while you're doing this, they say something to the effect of, if you turn against us, if you betray our rules, may you burn as this picture of this saint is burning. You burn like that. All right?
This is crazy.
I know. So they do that, and then they tell you the rules. And the rules are pretty simple. You don't rat people out. Always respect the boss. And be respectful of women. So that's nice, you know.
I assume that the Mafia breaks that rule of being respectful to women
All
on a regular
All the
basis,
time.
right?
All the time, yeah. I mean, it's mainly the women of other members.
Okay.
You don't hit on someone's wife or daughter. Like, that's disrespectful. Don't do. But yeah, most of these guys, you know, they're married, but they have a string of girlfriends, or they're involved with ladies of the night or whatever. Yeah, they're breaking these rules constantly.
Still, yeah.
And then the other big rule was stay away from narcotics, which they break even more than the be respectful to women thing. I mean, you can see that they get involved in narcotics all the time. Some of the biggest guys in mafia were narcotic. They were drug dealers. They dealt in heroin, and I don't know why this rule was ever a rule, because nobody follows it. And nobody gets in trouble for not following it, because they all do it.
I'm curious, and it's slightly off topic, but it just triggered in my head when you were discussing that. So you were talking about how, you know, respect the boss. Well, with the structure of this, with the boss, now is the boss until he dies, or can potentially another member of the Mafia overthrow the boss?
It's a good question. I would say typically until he dies, but it has been known for somebody to step down when they're older for retirement, or if somebody ends up going to prison, they might hand it off to somebody, because some guys do run it from prison, but it's easier to not have to run things from prison. So it's not always until they're dead. Bosses have a bad habit of getting killed. Less so in Milwaukee. Milwaukee's not as bad. But that's sort of the thing, is the higher up you go, the more likely there's somebody who's going to want you. So it's not always great to be the boss.
But you don't know of an instance where a lower member of the Mafia over the boss and took control.
Not in Milwaukee.
But that does happen other places.
It has happened.
Okay.
It has happened, yeah.
Okay, but not in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, we don't have a lot of firsthand knowledge of people becoming members in Milwaukee, because we're limited to what the informants tell us. Mm-hmm. Because, again, it's public. They don't keep like a ledger you can look at. But we know from informants that Frank Balostri, who was the mob boss for most of the time, we'll probably talk about the 60s, 70s, 80s. He became a member back in the 1940s. His sponsor was a man named Andrew DeSalvo, who was out of Racine. So it was kind of neat that a Racine guy was like his sponsor. And DeSalvo was related to other guys who were members both in the Milwaukee area and the Madison area. So he actually had connections all over them. So that was kind of neat.
But now he was not part of either one of the Mafias? The Madison or the Milwaukee Mafia?
DeSalvo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't be a sponsor if he wasn't.
that was what I was going to ask you. Okay.
Yeah. No, like Racine would be like part of Milwaukee, but they had their own little clique or whatever there. So they still answered to Milwaukee, but they had their own.
They had their own meetings or something.
Yeah. But yeah, the only time I know of people becoming members that they caught in Milwaukee, or an informant talked about in Milwaukee, was in 1968, and there were 4 guys who became members at the same time. It was Rudy Porchetta, Joseph Ania, Jimmy Gennaro, and Walter Brokaw. So if anybody knows his names, I know you don't, but if anybody out there knows those names, those guys all became members in 1968, and they even wrote down who their sponsors were in this. So the informants were very active in the 60s. So a lot of what we know comes out of the 60s. The biggest informant was killed in the 1970s. So our information stops in the 1970s. at least the best information we got. And I won't say who the informant was at this time. That's definitely a whole other topic. But
so now you say that the informants were killed in the 70s. The information stops. Did
well,
we never?
At least some of the best information, yeah.
Did we never go get new informants just because the mafia was at that point in time was not that big of a deal? Whereas in the 60s, it was probably at its peak. And so the police, law enforcement were way more focused on trying to know what's going on within the organization.
I would agree that it was probably at its peak in the 60s and 70s. I think that's probably right. And they got other informants. It's just I don't necessarily know who the informants were.
Oh, okay. So they're out there. You just have to figure out. You have yet to discover their names.
Right. This is sort of the thing is like they don't tell you who the informants were. Like even after they're long gone, 50 years later, they still won't reveal. It's like that's the one thing they take super serious is when they tell these guys we're not going to reveal. They don't. They really don't. So I know informants because in the documents it'll say like this information came from M-1, and that's like how they identify it is by these random numbers. And if you see enough documents, you can start putting the clues together and you know who a guy is. So I know who like the main is, but yeah, they had other informants who I have no idea who they were, and I probably will never know.
So maybe I misunderstood this because so like the 4 people that you talked about that became mafia members in 1968. They were not informants.
They were not informants.
No, but they're just an informant. This unknown M1 reported these people as okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
He was a guy who was again, I don't want to name his name yet, but he was a high-ranking guy. He had a brother who was involved, a father who was involved, an uncle who was involved. So, I mean, he got a lot of really good information. So yeah, if somebody was going to get made, he probably was at the ceremony when it happened. But I mean, he would have known months in advance that these guys were getting recruited.
Gotcha. It's all right, so you got any more for us?
I really don't. Yeah, if you had any other questions about how you become a member, but I think that's
I think you covered it pretty well. I would advise nobody that is listening to this podcast to go out and find out if that's really true. We highly discourage that.
Well, yeah, don't try to be a member of the Some of this might sound exciting and glamorous, but we do not encourage joining Mafia.
Yeah, we might need to add like a disclaimer at the beginning of the show or something.
Yeah, it's one of those pitfalls of researching and writing like true crime because you get excited, like oh man, this really cool murder happened, and you're already like you probably shouldn't say this really cool murder. That's not really but it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, I think that fascinating is the better word to go with, is the safer word to go with.
Fascinating. There we go.
That's cool.
Right. But that's the thing. You don't want to like promote it. You don't want to, encourage it. It's not good. People who kill people should get caught. But it really, that's the stuff that really grabs your attention.
Yeah. All right. Well, very cool. We will wrap this episode up. Gavin, if you want to just let everybody know if they got questions, where to hit you up at.
You can email MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. You can go to MilwaukeeMafia.com and find all the great things there. Or you can go to Facebook.com/MilwaukeeMafia, which I post to pretty regularly, and you can message me there.
Cool. And Patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia. And as always, please, if you enjoy this podcast, leave us a rating on your favorite podcast player. And we will be back in 2 weeks. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next week for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.